Hello and welcome to this high-level plenary session of the UN World Data Forum. I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of DevX. Great to be with all of you from all over the world who are joining this session because you know about data, you care about the importance of data, you see it as an opportunity to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly at a moment like this, when we've all been set back on our heels by this pandemic. You recognize that we need to redouble our efforts around data. So thank you for being part of this session where we've got a number of experts from around the world who are going to weigh in on some of these key themes. And the real focus of this session today is inclusion. It's leave no one behind, which is a core theme of the Sustainable Development Goals, but we want to bring it to bear on the issue of data. How do we ensure that the way we collect data, the data we present, leaves no one behind? And we're particularly thinking about vulnerable populations that often do get left behind of government services, of social protection programs that are left behind in our economies and our societies. And there was a time at the very beginning of this pandemic, it was brief, but there was a moment when we said the pandemic was going to be a great equalizer, right? We thought that this is hitting every country, every person, it affects all of us. We're all in the same boat. And I think very quickly we realized that that's really not the case, that actually it has shown the great inequalities that exist in the world today. That very much depending on whether you have a job that lets you work from home, whether you have an internet connection, whether you live in a place where there's strong governance, whether you have savings, all of these things really affect how this pandemic has impacted you and your family. And the truth is that for people who are left behind in society, normally the pandemic has just made it far worse. We're behind on the SDGs more than ever before. People are being pushed into poverty in rates we haven't seen. There are initial effects from the health crisis around the pandemic, and then secondary effects from the economy and the secondary effects that this pandemic is causing. So there are huge challenges, and in the world of data, we're all becoming more accustomed to tuning into data. We're studying what are the latest numbers in our community or in our country. We're getting to understand what are the various sources of data. What can I trust? What's credible? What's not? And so it's really an opportunity and a moment of amplification of what I think so many people who are part of this session today work on every day. And so I'm really pleased to help facilitate a conversation today that really looks at this question of how do we close the data gaps that will help us achieve those Sustainable Development Goals and do it in a way that leaves no one behind. We've got a number of experts to join us today. I'm just going to mention who they are, and then we'll dive right into the discussion. We have remarks from Mr. Bård Vegar Solhjell, who Bård Vegar Solhjell is the Director General of the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD. We're going to be hearing remarks from the Right Honorable Keith Claudius Mitchell, who's the Prime Minister of Grenada. We're going to be hearing from Mario Brun, who is the Director General of Statistics in Finland. We also will be hearing a statement from an SDG advocate, Eddie Ndopu. Mr. Alcags is with us, the co-founder and CEO of the Open Institute. And Ana Lucia Arellano, who is the chair of the International Disability Alliance, will be with us as well. So we've got a number of perspectives from all over the world that I think you're going to contribute to a really rich conversation. So welcome to all of you who are joining us around the world, and welcome to all of our panelists. I want to begin with Bård Vegar Solhjell, the Director General of the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. Love to hear your thoughts to get us started.
Thank you, and great to see you all, and thanks for having me. I really feel I'm at the right place today because I simply love data and statistics, and I've basically done all my life. The World Day of Statistics, it's celebrated every 5th year. It's a scandal. It should be at least once a week, and it's not a romantic love. It's an intellectual love, because if you look at progress and informed decision making, good data, good reliable statistics is at the heart of almost all good and informed decisions. This goes for the developed world, and it definitely goes for the developing world. But here's where we run into huge issues, and where we are working with it from NORAD's side. According to the World Bank, more than 100 developing countries do not have a functioning civil registration or vital statistics systems. More than 100 countries. And to give you an example what it means, globally, 2/3 of annual deaths are not registered, meaning around 38 million deaths are not part of official records, according to the World Health Organization. And just imagine what impact that has on numbers and decision making right now during the pandemic. To deal with this is important and maybe particularly important in a leave no one behind perspective. And that makes it really important now to the SDGs, as the leave no one behind agenda and the perspective is an important part of the whole SDG agenda and ways of thinking. I think it's useful here also to talk about both aggregated and disaggregated data. Of course, aggregated data is really important in this respect. We need ability to quality data at a high level, where we can study progress and have informed decision making when it comes to progress and decision and so on. But I would also like to point specifically to disaggregated data and the value it has. Questions like which groups are really in most need, our education systems, who are those who are left behind, in which regions is it actually that we need to move in first. All these kinds of questions rely on good and disaggregated data. UNICEF published a study this year showing in the summer, in June, that 1 in 4 children below the age of 5 do not officially exist, as these births have never been officially recorded. And without these records, how will states know how many schools are needed? How will they know the percentage with disabilities? And how will they plan for the years to come, for kindergartens, for school, and so on? These are real and basic questions, and they need to be dealt with. And all this is the background for the Norwegian work with partner countries on basic institution building and governance when it comes to statistics and data. We in NORAD are working with our close colleagues in the Norwegian Bureau of Statistics, working with partner countries to build up their systems for registration, their basic statistics databases and registration systems. We have a lot of experience with the use of basic public registers, and we try to share that experience and discuss with partner countries what's the right approach in different cases. Just one brief example before I wrap up. We've supported the strengthening of Malawi's, one of the world's poorest countries, statistical capacity and economic planning, with experts from Statistics Norway. And according to a World Bank index, Malawi is now one of the countries in the sub-Saharan African region with the best statistical capacity. These are the kind of progress that it's not the most spectacular. It often doesn't reach the headlines like what we do in renewable energy or in health or in education, but it's the basis for progress on many other issues, and thus a real important part of our development partnerships. Thank you so far.
Thank you, Bora. And it is the kind of thing that will make the headlines at DevX. We are also, like you, data nerds, and appreciate the chance to report on some of these systemic issues. And we'll come back to this in the questions, but I like the way that you outlined that this is an important investment opportunity for donors, because often donors do want to look at the investments that directly provide service to people in need and maybe see these data and data systems as something that could be someone else's problem. It's harder to get political support behind, but it is so essential. And you made that linkage really clear. We now have some remarks we want to hear from the Prime Minister of Grenada, Keith Claudius Mitchell. And I'll ask the producers, it's been pre-recorded, if they can just roll that tape.
It is my pleasure to address this forum on a subject that is very close to my heart. I thank the United Nations for this invitation to participate in this important meeting as we navigate our way through the turbulence of COVID-19 pandemic. As the lead head for science and technology, including ICT in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet, it is my vision that Caribbean governments will give this subject the attention it deserves to transform and modernize our statistical landscape, to enable responsiveness of national statistical offices to the ever-increasing and ever-changing demands for scientific data. It is likely that regional economies could have been far more advanced had we ensured adequate investment in statistical systems to facilitate more effective decision-making in our region. For small island developing states, SIDS, building resilience is now a key development watchword that is even more important as we maneuver this global health crisis. To successfully create the strategies necessary to effect recovery and foster renewed economic growth and development, high-quality data is a development imperative. As a CARICOM champion for official statistics, I am very optimistic that there is great hope for statistics development in our Caribbean countries. It was an honor for me to influence the creation of the Statistic Master Plan, which was unanimously endorsed by my fellow CARICOM leaders not long ago. The COVID-19 pandemic has elevated the visibility of statistics. While it has exposed enormous data gaps, it has also provided a unique opportunity to further advocate for the importance of statistics and to advance the CARICOM strategy. We therefore call on all international development partners and the private sector to support the implementation of the overreaching CARICOM RSDS and the corresponding national strategies to optimize statistical outcomes. International support for the resource mobilization strategy, one of the accompanying frameworks of the RSDS, will help secure better development outcomes in the CARICOM SIDS, including reporting and sustainable development goals. Here in Grenada, despite the challenges brought on by the national lockdown and the accompanying work from our home policies, the Central Statistical Office used remote platforms to conduct most of its activities and to pursue initiatives and utilize the wealth of opportunities for training and development. Not surprisingly, therefore, this has been one of the busiest years for statistics in our country. I must therefore underscore here the population and housing census, since it is the most important source of scientific data about the people and on the housing stock of our country. In fact, for many SIDS, it is the only source of reliable data that covers essential characteristics about the population, and it also informs the SDG indicators. CARICOM countries scheduled to undertake the census in 2020 were forced to reschedule due in part to the pandemic and the budgetary constraints that have arisen because of additional pandemic-related expenditure. I appeal here to the international community to support the census in these vulnerable countries. At this juncture, I urge us all to seize the opportunities that lie within the challenges and reshape our thinking and become more creative and innovative. Statistics is often recognized as the voice of the people, but we cannot continue to effectively plan for people if we have not assessed their abilities and vulnerabilities. In conclusion, therefore, I must emphasize that crises amplify the need for robust and reliable data to quickly make critical decisions. Hence, innovation, resilience, and the international development cooperation are crucial more than ever in ensuring that official statistics not only continue to thrive, but also better inform our development needs and strategies. I thank you, and I wish you a constructive discourse on this important topic.
Well, I wish the Prime Minister were here in person so I could thank him for those great remarks. He's added a lot to the discussion, and I think in particular, I like the connection he drew between having the right data and making better decisions, which is critical for any government, any leader in government. And I think it helps to underline the case that the organizers of today's event are making around the return on investment you get from an investment in statistics and data and a census, for example. I want to bring into the discussion and welcome Mario Brun, who is the Director General of Statistics in Finland, and also currently chairs the Conference of European Statisticians and is a member of the high-level group for partnership, coordination, and capacity building for statistics for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So these issues are right up your alley, Mario, and we'd love to hear your take this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Raji. Difficult name you have. Honored to be part of this group, and my speech. Of course, the Sustainable Development Goals are universal, and the commitment "Leave no one behind" puts the world's most vulnerable and marginalized people, as well as countries, at the top of the 2030 agenda. However, the challenge of having right information to really know where we stand is widely recognized, as mentioned already by my previous speakers. To focus my speech on three aspects, also shown on the slide. This is the aspects of statistical process: the data sources, data disaggregation, and data dissemination. And I find all of these important when we talk about leaving no one behind. If we start with data sources, statistical offices are big eaters of data. We need data for statistics, quality of data. Many choices throughout the statistical process affect the outcome. What are the main data sources for statistics? My colleagues, the Prime Minister from Grenada mentioned the people and how to get data on people. And the board, I think you mentioned the registers. When we think about data, we have to look outside the National Statistical Office for data sources. Human activities in society generate all the time huge amounts of data every day, every minute. And a drop of this data is a source of our work at the Statistical Office. Throughout our work, the production of statistics, we add value to the The data generated and specify the dimensions and possibilities of the data. If I take a very, very practical example, consider the process of deciding what kind of data to collect. When a person checks into an accommodation, hotel or so, the choice of questions for that simple card reflect what kind of data we will have available for statistical purposes. And this goes as well to what you talked about, development projects, not to do with data, but other kind of development projects. And I think we should be able to also include data collection to those processes. Similarly, it matters what we ask in data collections of statistical offices and whom we ask. Population census is one. And also how we reach those we would like to see as our information providers. Statistical offices are having discussions about the use of new data sources for statistical production. And we already have some experience of using, for instance, mobile data. And as we continue, we have to keep in mind the limitations of these data sources and discuss these limitations as well. Whom do they leave behind, is my question. To succeed, we need to interact with different parties and work beyond our own offices and own professions, so that the data that is being collected around us and leaves no one behind. When we look at data processing, of course, based on averages, misses opportunities to identify specific challenges that must be addressed to implement leave no one behind commitment. We can't observe the possible progress of this so-called LNOB commitment in averages. We need a complete picture. When we talk about leaving no one behind, which groups, you already mentioned, which groups of people do we mean? Children and youth, refugees, migrants, senior citizens, men, women, people in areas affected by complex humanitarian emergencies, COVID-19 people, maybe affected by terrorism, poor people, and so on. This issue is complex, and to collect all this data is, of course, very, very complicated. I think it is important to take care of all specific details that we use them later. On the other hand, we should also find new data sources and statistical enrich our data that is maybe missing some specifics. This journey can only be continued from the present. The first step to explore is how things are now and make it visible, and to have the kind of conversations we are having here today. The third part, what I wanted to mention, is the publishing of statistics. Values are also present when we publish statistics, how we classify, how we represent the data. Leaving no one behind will require the use of and publication of data in order to allow an in-depth look at trends across different populations. Do the official statistics succeed in making everybody visible? This is the visibility in statistics isn't easy if one doesn't even exist in population registers, as mentioned already. So it is important to think about also the access to official statistics and how we disseminate and communicate. Data journalists can bring data close to people. Could we, as the producers of official statistics, do the same thing so that statistics could be more relevant as an information source to different population groups, so they know that we know something about them. The goal of official statistics is a picture of sustainable development. To achieve this goal and to see the progress in the leaving no one behind, we need continuous dialogue with many interest groups. As data is created everywhere in society, the creation process is not merely in our hands. We therefore have to agree mutually with all parties involved on the dimensions of the data. And national statistical offices play a key role in societies in assuring the quality of the data that we need in the future. So I think we need to work together internationally and also nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. And we have time now to move to some questions for Bor and Mario. And we haven't gotten any in yet from our online audience. I want to encourage you to go ahead and put in questions if you have them, and we'll filter them through and try to include them in the conversation. I thought I might just begin with the two of you on this issue of disaggregated data, because it's not a new one. And in fact, we've been talking about this for many years, and certainly in the context of the SDGs. Why is this such a hard problem to solve? If we have the leading donor agencies, the UN agencies, the foundations, Bill and Melinda Gates have been working on this on gender data, for example. If there's so much focus and attention and awareness, at least at a certain level, on disaggregated data, why is it such a hard problem to solve? I open that to either of you who wants to take it.
Well,
since
I still have, I can maybe say a few words. Of course, the different difficulty lies in that we need to get data on you and me and everybody else. And this is, even for statistical offices, this is very, very difficult. And even in a register-based country like Finland is, there are some details of the data which we could say that this is disaggregation that we do not have in registers. And of course, data secrecy, we have certain issues that we are not allowed to collect about people. And people do not want to tell. And then the other issue, when we disseminate data, if you are too small a group, you the secrecy again. We don't want to show the private people there. That's my sort of first thought. Thanks.
Or what do you want to add to this?
Yeah, just another perspective maybe on this, and you touched upon this, Ray, actually in your comment after my intervention, which is about the financing and how you can get donors, whether they be institutional donors or private sector donors or whatever, to invest in this. Of course, it is easier to present the case for let's vaccinate all children, or let's make sure all girls in the world get a good quality education, and we also invest more in that from Norad's side than statistics operation. But still, I think it's key to be able to persuade more donors that it's actually really important. And let me mention 3 points. First, many people from the civil service, politicians and so on, know that good data and statistics have been important for their own country's growth and progress, and many have experienced it. So I try to speak about that, to appeal to that experience. This is also a good idea for developing country. And secondly, I say that also to them that it's really cheap development cooperation. I mean, if you want to help all people in a country to be able to go to school, costs a lot of money, or if you want to vaccinate every child. But working with a few experts, building up a functioning statistics institution is cheaper, but it can be catalytic. I mean, it can have all kinds of effects on other issues like education and health. And then finally, in Norad, my predecessor did something I think was really smart. We established the different kinds of institutional programs we have in what we call the knowledge bank, which is almost like a brand, you know. This is the part of NORA, this is the division where we work with institutional issues like statistics. And that has made it a bit easier to reach out and to get people to know about the work, and then also to fund it, I think.
Maybe, Bor, you can pick up on another theme that Mario began to touch on, which is the idea that we are now awash in data, right? There are many sources of data, and National Statistical Office may be just taking a very small percentage of it. But we have digital devices, we have internet companies now that know so much about our search history and what we're doing online. There's a chance, perhaps, that some of these technology companies know much more about the individual's data than a National Statistical Office might. And I guess the question is, given this flood of new data and the flood of new sources, but this agenda about leaving no one behind, is there anything we could do differently now than we might not have been able to do 5 years ago or 10 years ago? I would assume that the leave no one behind agenda is almost made more difficult by these new sources of data, because they likely leave out the people, the marginalized groups we're talking about. But I wonder if this reality of where technology is heading and where data is becoming so much more ubiquitous, whether that changes the approach that organizations like NORAD might take.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and probably one that institutions like ourselves should think more about, because we tend to take a somewhat traditional approach, right? We work with other public institutions, help building institutions in other countries. Like you say, we know that now that a few companies probably know a lot more about us and have far better data than a lot of the national bureaus around the world. And true, of course, for some of the most vulnerable, they can be kind of left out in these data. For instance, if it relies on smartphones and so on. But still, we might also underestimate some of the data available there. Some countries, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, have a quite impressive mobile coverage now, at least when you are looking at 2 or 3G. And quite a few places now have the internet coverage in many places around the world have grown, quite substantially just in a few years. And this will probably continue in the years to come. So maybe there are opportunities working with the private sector, with some of the tech companies and so on, to develop this more than we've been able to do so far.
Mario, any thoughts on the same topic?
Yes, just to continue, yes, definitely. There was, by the way, yesterday a session where there was some of these big company people telling what kind of data they provide. So that might be useful for you to watch. But mobile data definitely, mobile phones are also used for transaction, for business, so in developing countries, they are a very vital, important source of data, and to be able to use some of that data, I think is worldwide very, very useful. Of course, it lacks some of the details of the user of the mobile phone, but anyhow, it does give a big advantage of showing what is happening in the society, how people move, what kind of transactions they do, what kind of business is happening, because it's really a wide, very good source of data. But of course, this is again one topic where we have to work together, public offices with private sector, these global companies. It's so working together.
Yeah, and the ground is shifting. Of course, we see how much data there is today, but to Bor's point, you're seeing ubiquitous smartphone penetration and internet connectivity that may be coming to many more parts of the world in just the next few years, and what happens at that point, and how do we change our work? We have very little time, so one quick question we got in from the audience, if either of you have a thought about it, which is very specific. It's focused on the idea of citizen science programs. and that these are a great way to get disaggregated data as long as people are provided with feedback that they can use in their everyday life. Do you have any view on the use of citizen science data to close data gaps? Is that something that either of you are familiar with or have an opinion on?
I can reply. I don't have any experience myself, but my colleague from the mapping agency in Finland said that they provided people in Finland the possibility to add data to the mapping data that they were provided, and they were very, very happy. And they said Finland has the best sort of mapping geo data that there is possible. So that's an
Yeah, and I know that. Go ahead, Bor.
No, I was just going to say that I'm not really familiar with it in a developing country context myself either. But of course, we know it from, I mean, Norway as well, and in some instances have relied upon it partly to build statistics databases. You can definitely imagine it as an interesting approach. I just also wanted to add, you know, speaking about the former issue. Another part of the knowledge bank, the work we do there from NORAD side, is the work we do with what is called digital public goods, which is growing now as an international issue and as a form of international cooperation. There's been a high-level panel. There's a report now from the UN General Secretary. UNICEF is one of our partners there. And of course, building a stronger international base of support for doing things on digital public goods will also be important, not only working domestically or directly with partner countries, also building the issue globally.
Yeah, I'll just add that I know of at least one Silicon Valley company called Premise that has a network of paid participants all across sub-Saharan Africa and in other markets as well, who use their phones to take photographs as a way to gather data, and they get paid a small amount. And so, for example, if the World Bank wanted to know the price of tomatoes in a market in Nairobi, they could ask that question and people would go there and take pictures of what the prices are. And so there may be, you know, data gathering tools like that, which could be employed on a pro bono basis instead of being paid, but just, you know, organized by citizens who want to support their government's collection of data. I think it's an interesting question and opportunity, perhaps. We're running out of time, but we did have one last point, and maybe you can wrap any final thoughts you have into this, which is just a question about how the private sector now is such an important source of data around the SDGs. And this is not just companies, but thinking more broadly. And so how can the national statistical offices and the private sectors better work together to share data against the SDG targets? Maybe Mario, if you want to address that, and any other final thoughts you have, and then Bor, and then we'll close this aspect of the panel.
This sharing data very in both developing and I think developed countries as well. We are not there where we would like to be. So this is discussed within the European Union, within the United Nations Statistical Commission. There's a big data group there working with all kinds of new types of data sources and how to use them, how to negotiate with these big players, how we could get data. So a lot is being done. And I would really look for the UN statistical sort of umbrella, because we can find a lot of examples from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bor, any final thoughts on that or anything else?
Yeah, well, I think it's a kind of a takeaway from this session. Let's look closer to the the opportunities to cooperate between the private sector, the growing amounts of data and different forms of data there, and our more traditional approach. And I'll take it as also as a challenge to myself. I think in Norway, Statistics Norway, which is they are your colleagues, I believe, Mario. They collect something like 85% of data that registered data in Norway, right? So it's a very different situation. But let me provide you with one example. In one of the huge efforts we do in our development cooperation is through the Norwegian Climate and Forest Initiative, which is working with partners on preserving rainforests and stop degradation of rainforests in both the Amazon and the Congo Basin, Indonesia, and many other places. They just signed an agreement with private partners, Google and others, to share satellite data and to buy satellite data, to use it to actually because the data now is so good, it can be used to look at the tools and so on, which are used in the rainforest to stop illegal logging, and can be a really important tool against crimes in forest regions. So that's one effort where we've been able to cooperate with the private sector also. Then yeah, let me just wrap up by thanking you for having me again. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure everyone at home is thanking the two of you, Mario and Bor. Did you want to say one last thing, Mario?
Yes, I sent you the big data work of UN, so maybe you can share it. I don't know if this chat is shared with the audience. Just thank you.
I don't believe it is, but hopefully the organizers can get that out in front of everyone. And I thank again both of you for your participation today. And we're going to continue moving on to the session. We now have a short video, which is from the UN Secretary General's advocate for the SDGs, Eddie Ndopu. He's an award-winning, internationally acclaimed activist and humanitarian, and he's got a message for all of us about what the issue of data and leave no one behind means to him. So let's hear it.
My name is Eddie Ndopu. I am one of 17 eminent advocates appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres. I am delighted to be speaking to you today, and I think that there has never been a more opportune moment than the present to really unpack the role of data in advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The COVID pandemic has illuminated for all of us the ways in which the same communities, crisis after crisis after crisis, experience the worst manifestations of these crises, whether we're speaking about the global healthcare crisis or the climate crisis or the crisis pertaining to racial injustice and racial inequality. The mantra that underpins the SDGs is this idea of leaving nobody behind. But how do we account for leaving nobody behind if we don't ensure that we invest in the disaggregation of data so that we can identify and pinpoint the communities who are furthest behind the line of opportunities? It is imperative that we're able to disaggregate on the lines of gender, on the lines of disability, on the lines of race, on the lines of geography. These are absolutely important in order for us to paint a picture, in order to properly understand who it is that we're speaking about when we say leave nobody behind. There is also a correlation between the invisibility that people experience in their lives on the basis of who they are or where they come from, and the invisibility in terms of the dearth of data that is available on these specific communities. So if we are to ensure that nobody is made to disappear from public view, then we must redouble our efforts to ensure that nobody disappears in terms of the data points that are absolutely fundamental to ensuring that we're able to account for everybody. I believe this is super key if we are to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And so, as one of Mr. Antonio Guterres' advocates for the SDGs, I will reiterate what he says and say to you listening that we need to put all hands on deck and do everything in our power to ensure that nobody gets left behind. I thank you.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that message from Eddie. We appreciate him being part of this event today. I'd like to ask Al Cogs to join our discussion. Al is the founder of the Open Institute, an African organization that works with governments and civil society organizations to promote open government and citizen engagement. And he currently sits on the technical advisory committee of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. So these are issues you work on all the time. Please join us with your opening thoughts, and then we'll come back around for another conversation.
Thank you very much, Raj, for having me here. And as I'm listening to the conversations, I realize that I'm in such eminent company on these issues. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the soft underbelly of the world in ways that we had not imagined before. Especially when you think about inequality and you think about the most unprivileged people around the world. Those who are usually left behind on most of the issues that Mr. Ndopo has just talked about are still the ones who are being harmed not only by the virus, but even by the containment measures that we have taken to slow down the spread of the virus. I want to use my 5 minutes to make two major points. The first point is the role of the citizen in all of this discussion. If you imagine your own village, your hamlet, your community, and you decided to try and identify its priorities and needs to make sure that literally everyone has a packet of maize flour. Now, maize flour in my country is the staple, is what every family must have in their granary. Now, imagine that you wanted to give every single person maize flour. Would you go and collect a representative sample of that community to establish who needs the flour the most? Or would you go house by house and check who has flour and who doesn't? This is what we do at the Open Institute. We work with communities to collect their own data, that's citizen-generated data, so that they can better represent themselves to government, even to us as nonprofits, and say, these are our priorities, and this is what is most important to us, so that you can then meet people at their point of need. Now, when we started doing this work, hardcore statisticians told us that it was not possible, it was too expensive to be able to do this because of the fact that you have to get enumerators and so on and so forth. It's still a controversial subject. But one of the things that we have found is that it is cheaper and more effective because the people themselves have a vested interest in improving their own community's well-being. And if you use the power of the people, they will collect their own data and they will provide it in whichever format you want. We worked with Chief Francis Kariuki, who unfortunately has passed on today. But we worked with this gentleman in his community and collected data from 12,500 households. And out of that, we were able to see those homes, each of them get a water filter in every single household. Mr. Ndopo has just talked about people who are being invisible from a data perspective. We're currently working with people within the extractive sector, the artisanal small-scale miners, to make sure that they count themselves and they not been a better time for the LNOB agenda, the Leave No One Behind agenda, because government would be able to achieve its goals more effectively and completely by reaching every single homestead. Just a couple of days ago, I learned that the WHO and its partners literally had to visit every single home in India in the process of eradicating smallpox. They went to 120 million homes multiple times. They essentially did more than 1 billion house calls in order to eradicate smallpox. This is what it takes for development to happen. And if we want to do this well, then we must divide the world in bite-sized chunks into villages and hamlets and provinces, and we will be able to achieve the SDGs. The final point I want to make is that the COVID-19 has demonstrated that governments have been using data in very dangerous ways, or in ways that can be, dangerous in the long run. The issues of contact tracing can be extrapolated. In my continent, we have seen where we have authoritarian, and actually now even in the West, we are seeing some authoritarian governments that are actually using contact tracing for purposes of more than just containing COVID-19. It is actually possible for them to do this. A group of civil society organizations in Africa have come together, and what they are doing is they're working, they're calling on all of us, you and I, to come together to work on a set of principles that must guide our governments to restore data rights to their citizens during the pandemic, and especially as the pandemic sort of wanes. We must make sure that we have the kind of policies that say the end of the pandemic will be known as follows, and after that, we shall restore people's rights in this ways. We shall make sure that private sector does not share people's personal data in these ways, and we shall make sure that we don't continue to track people's mobile phones or track their locations and that sort of thing, so that we can be able to restore their rights. I take this opportunity to call on all of us to review the declaration that has been written by these civil society organizations across the continent of Africa, and to even endorse it because it is relevant everywhere in the world. The declaration will be live as of tomorrow on restoredata-rights.africa, and it will be formally launched on the 11th of November 2020. And I'm inviting all of you to please go check it out, give us your comments, and endorse it, because all of us have a stake in this agenda. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And we will come back as we get into the conversation section to those two issues you brought up. One is the citizen data opportunity, how you get citizens much more engaged in collecting data for their own communities. And then the second is the challenge of data privacy and authoritarian governments misusing it. So we'll come back to those. I want to welcome to the session today Ana Lucia Arellano, who is the chair of the International Disability Alliance. And she is a Latin American human rights activist and advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities, I think for almost 24 years, inspired by her son, Jose Miguel, a self-advocate with Down syndrome. She's the president of the Latin American Network of Non-Governmental Organizations of Persons with Disabilities and Their Families, which is an umbrella organization from the Global South that represents 56 national disabled people's organizations in 19 countries in the Latin American and Caribbean region. And I think you join us today, Ana Lucia, from Ecuador, if I have that right. And it's really nice to see you. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, you're right. Greetings from Quito, Ecuador, Latin America. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to be delivering today with you at this very special event for us. On behalf of the International Disability Alliance, IDA, we congratulate the organizers of the World Data Forum for hosting such an important event during these unprecedented times that we are living now. We recognize and applaud the efforts of member states, the interagency and expert group on SDG indicators of the UN system. In particular, we applaud the efforts to implement the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. The steps to strengthen the collection and disaggregation of data by disability and the commitment to raise the standard of the inclusion of persons with disabilities across all levels. Despite exceptional work, challenges remain that require additional attention, commitment, and investment from all of us at all levels, all countries, and indeed all regions. Around the world, persons with disabilities and their families have been adversely affected by COVID-19 pandemic, exacerbating existing inequalities and marginalization within the society and economically. To understand the situation of persons with disabilities around the world and how they were affected by the pandemic, the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities carried out a research. The most critical findings indicated that myriad barriers exist for persons with disabilities as a result of the pandemic, including new and exacerbated barriers. The most common barriers that emerge from the findings include, and please me share with you, lack of access to COVID-19 related information for all persons with disabilities. Second, barriers in receiving social protection measures and employment. Third, lack of disability inclusion on COVID recovery and response efforts at all government levels, creating significant disconnections between national and local actions as persons with disabilities were not consulted in those decision-making processes. Moreover, the study found that there is a lack of official COVID-19 data on persons with disabilities worldwide, and that out of 93 respondents, no governments were disaggregating COVID-19 data by disability. Consequently, persons with disabilities stay invisible, are not counted, and will be left even further behind. Another outcome of the pandemic has been the increased dialogue around disaggregated data. Data are needed to adequately address response and recovery measures, and to recalibrate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The roadmap out of the pandemic is via the 2030 Agenda. We all know this. And if we truly want to leave no one behind, then everyone must be counted and included with a 2030 agenda that is recalibrated, inclusive, and fully funded. Monitoring and reporting on further progress is key, and it is a straightforward process thanks to the Washington Group's short set of questions and the Washington Group UNICEF Child Functioning Module to disaggregate data about disability. These tools are designed to be included in other data collections and are internationally comparable, well-tested, efficient, and easy to incorporate into ongoing data collection of national statistical systems. The question sets are also well positioned to address the growing need for information on COVID-19 and disability. So disaggregation can identify areas where intervention is needed to address the marginalization of COVID-19 on persons with disabilities. Also important is that civil society can provide knowledge gaps in SDG monitoring through the use of community-driven data as a complementary local source of information and the representation of the people most left behind. Community-driven data can inform policies to ensure that the most marginalized groups, including persons with disabilities, are included and counted, and thereby fostering inclusive national SDG implementation. Please let me now share with you my concluding recommendations. Citizen-driven disability data needs to be recognized and utilized by national statistical offices to fill data gaps in SDG monitoring for persons with disabilities. In addition, local authorities need to be partners in the data collection process and informed by that data. Statisticians, policymakers, organizations of persons with disabilities, OPDs, and allies need to learn from each other and use available data to address challenges and gaps in policies to realize international commitments for women and girls with disabilities. The Washington Group short set of questions and UNICEF Washington Group Child Functioning Module should be used to disaggregate disability and monitor progress in attaining the SDGs and to identify areas where intervention is needed to address the marginalization of COVID-19 on persons with disabilities. Disability data advocacy efforts led by the disability movement should be strengthened with the development of tools and investment to build capacity in stakeholders, especially organizations of persons with disabilities. So the International Disability Alliance will continue to promote practical steps towards evidence-based policymaking to achieve the global, regional, and national transformation We need to realize the rights of persons with disabilities in line with the 2030 Agenda and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Ana Lucia, and Al. Welcome you back to the discussion as well. You both gave great and compelling presentations, and you talked about, Ana Lucia, the importance of evidence-based policymaking. And it's so easy for a conversation about data to feel very narrow and technical, to feel like this is something for a very small subset of people to care about. But I think what you've both done a good job explaining is how data really reflects our values and it reflects our political priorities. And there have been so many examples where we neglect vulnerable groups, we don't count them in the data, and that's just one symptom of not actually addressing their direct needs, even during a time of crisis. So I guess I want to bring both of you into the discussion about how you think about sort of the political side of this data question. How do you think about getting governments to prioritize data collection for citizens, especially from vulnerable groups? Do you hear direct pushback on this idea? Do people say, this isn't the right place to prioritize donor funding or government funding? Or what do you think the barriers are that stand in your way from seeing better data collection from citizens, especially for vulnerable groups, so that we can get the disaggregated data that we need to achieve the SDGs? I open that up to either of you. What are these barriers you see in your work every day?
Ana Lucia, if I may go first, I think the biggest place where we see resistance is not within government officials. Actually, it is within the technical guys within government. What happens is that in principle, everybody agrees that we must collect data from every single person to be able to count everybody. And that if you don't count everybody, then the data doesn't necessarily count. But what happens is that the technical guys tend to get so lost in the forest of the scientificness of the data and so on, that what happens is that they nitpick themselves into inactivity, sort of into paralysis. But where government is concerned and where policymakers are concerned, what they care about more is, can we achieve more? So we are working, for example, with subnational governments who are our county governments, kind of the equivalents of the states in America. And what we do with them is that we talk to them about this, and they say, for us, it is important that we can talk to investors and get them to come. If investors just want to know how many mango trees I have in my county, then I must be able to count all the mango trees in every homestead so that I can be able to tell them I have 1,000 mango trees and you'll be able to get mangoes all year round. So they're very utilitarian in their approach to data. And a lot of the data that actually tends to be useful is not even necessarily statistical data, as it is administrative data, where it is the data that, in my view, actually makes a big change is what they call administrative data, rather than the statistical data, because of the fact that it actually goes to a very large extent to actually pinpoint every single household and show the status of every single person.
Ana Lucia, how do you see the barriers that you face when you're trying to push governments to invest more, prioritize disaggregated data, particularly for people living with disabilities?
Well, we see that our main obstacles that we are facing include the need for more capacity building at the national and regional levels. If disability data is not being collected by official statistical offices, then community-driven data needs to be used to complement the official data and to fill these gaps to ensure that everyone is included and counted. And for example, enumerators need training on how to collect data on persons with disabilities. We had a very successful time when we could, in Ecuador, participate at this exercise where the National Statistical Office invited us on to accompany them and make all the tests for the collection of data in the next census that was integrating the Washington Group short set of questions. And it was interesting on how they asked us and consulted us of the way forward. So we need both sides, population informed, fully informed on how we are collecting data, and enumerators fully trained on how to reach persons with disabilities, how to use an inclusive language, how or why these questions were placed here, and the importance of collecting data in an inclusive way. And of course, if we have to keep insisting with governments about that in worldwide there is 1 billion of persons with disabilities, and that population needs to have this baseline where governments will really demonstrate that they are funding in the increasing in the benefit of offering and ensuring that fully realization of the rights of persons with disabilities. And if we do not measure that growth, if we do not measure that enhance of the quality of life of persons with disabilities, then this 1 billion persons with disabilities will never be never get to know if they will really deserve a better life, a better education, better access to health services, and especially now that we're living with this COVID-19 pandemic, if they have really survived to the right to live. We were very successful when we presented all this data at the time that we had all these discussions and began all these negotiations in the new global development goals on the rights of persons with disabilities. And when we really, the disability movement, change all this narrative with evidence that there are 1 billion persons with disabilities worldwide that deserve to be counted, to be visible, and to really be able to be key actors on inclusive development, then now we have an inclusive 2030 agenda.
Yeah, you know that expression, you measure what matters. And if governments aren't measuring these things, then as you say, how do you know whether you're making progress or whether you're prioritizing it? I do want to recommend to all of you who are following this online, following the broadcast, if you have questions that you'd like to pose to Alcogs or Ana Lucia, please do submit them. We'll try to get as many as we can integrated into the discussion. Maybe we can just kind of pick up a theme that we've already gotten to a little bit as a group, which is around technology and the opportunity it presents. And I can turn to you, Al Cogs, because you have said that citizen data presents a real opportunity. And I wonder, are there ways we can use technology, different ways, that maybe can make it more possible to generate citizen data at scale in ways that can then get integrated into county authorities in your home country in Kenya and elsewhere into the way they actually work?
As a matter of fact, yes, technology has made it so easy for a lot of these things to be done easily and cost effectively, because one of the biggest challenges that we face is that among the technical crowd, they worry about the cost of these things. It is now become a lot easier and a lot more cost effective for us to do it. I'll give you a good example. At the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, when it really hit our country, we started working with the government to try and figure out how they can get citizen voices so that they know where shops are overcharging for things like sanitizer. They know which communities are not having access to water, where they know how which communities are having civil strife because of the fact that they're fighting over scarce resources, that sort of thing. And we built something called Nuru.live. And essentially what Nuru.live is, we built it over 3 weeks. And essentially what it is that it's a simple data collection that allows for citizens, wherever they are, to either take a picture, type in whatever it is that they're seeing, take a voice note and say whatever it is they're seeing, take a video and post it. And then we and the government would actually sit back and review that data and actually see what is possible.
Ana Lucia, anything you want to add on the opportunity around technology, especially when it comes to gathering citizen data about people living with disabilities?
Yeah, we have worked with people with disabilities in Nairobi who have gone around Nairobi and mapped every single building and street to check how accessible it is. And what they have done with that is that they have provided that data back to government and said, enforce the law and make sure all these buildings are accessible so that I can go to work, I can go to school, I can do whatever I need to do. So technology has enabled us to be able to do these things. And it is actually today a lot more possible. All of these tools that we have built, for example, are open source. So it is very possible for somebody else in another country to pick it up and run with it.
Ana Lucia, anything you want to add on this theme about how we can better use technology to generate citizen data?
Yes, indeed. Technology plays a key role. And I must say that in the last few years, modern technology has produced more data than ever. Persons with disabilities, of course, rely on technology, on accessible technology, for communication and information access, even though accessible technology yet is not available in every country and in every region, especially in the global south. But we have been engaged in making technology accessible worldwide, which is the key to advance in the collection of data and in all these efforts to learn about the situation of persons with disabilities. Data collected by the tech industry needs to be complemented by data collected by civil society. There should be a matching point. So technology and the use of community-driven data have to be used to complement these data gaps in official data and measuring the groups most left behind in SDG implementation, including persons with disabilities. So again, technology is a key issue now.
Get one last question to all four of you, if I could, which is really thinking about the future. You know, we're talking here about the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. What are some of the big picture trends that you're tuned into and that you think people following this conversation should be tuned into when it comes to gathering disaggregated data to leave no one behind in this 2030 agenda? What are some of the big things you're looking at that are future oriented? I want to hear from all of you, Mario and Bor as well. Whoever would like to start, maybe I can look to you, Mario.
It's challenging with these video connections to look at somebody, but yes, I was thinking maybe because I was listening to Alcax and Ana Lucia, very, very nice examples of what is done in their areas. But I was thinking of when we talk about the big data and new types of data, this is not national. Local, it's not national, it is sometimes even global data, and the work to use that data should also be done sort of wider, so we can benefit from the work done in certain areas with some of the companies. That's one idea. So also in Europe, this is the kind of road to take, not to use national, but to collect the data together. Of course, the satellite images is this type of data that does not restrict itself to national borders. But maybe that's enough. Thank you. Excellent to listen to all this.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we're winding down. We just have a couple of minutes left, but maybe Bor, do you have any final thoughts as you look to the future, big trends we should be paying attention to when it comes to leaving no one behind?
So maybe just a few or two brief issues. First, we've touched upon it, but getting donors on board, I think is really important. And maybe just also using the leave no one behind agenda and the strong emphasis on this in the SDGs to actually getting donors, public, private, to understand that investing in statistics, in data, in institutions is really important and an important part of the agenda. And secondly, very much inspired by this conversation, public-private partnerships for us, it works through major public institutions, understanding the new data sources better, getting new partners, trying to innovate basically to use the actual sources of data that are there. That I would think, I take it as a challenge to myself also.
Thank you so much, Bor. Let me go to Alcogs. You're muted.
I think for me, the two big points I might encourage us to think about is, number one, in this data conversation, let's put the citizen first. If we put the citizen first, then it becomes possible for us to attend to their issues a lot better. Secondly, we must begin to seriously have a conversation about the complex issues that must come into play for purposes of restoring data rights. So we hope that you'll all join us on 11/11/2020 for that conversation, because it's a big conversation and it's one that we're hoping to have with all of you.
Thank you so much. And Ana Lucia.
For us, leaving no one behind measurement by 2030 should draw an inclusive entire picture about inclusive development. And for this, we insist that we need very robust data sets on disability to help monitor progress. It is important to measure whether people with disability are really being left behind, or whether they are progressing equally with others, where or everywhere, and this information and this data to be disaggregated. For us, the key trend is to support organizations of persons with disabilities with technical support, advocacy guidance, and especially the opportunity for periodical information exchange and learning. Consequently, the Disability Data Advocacy Working Group was established by the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities to provide a global platform for information exchange, learning, and dialogue, sharing of good practices and collaboration, and disability data collection, disaggregation, and analysis. And we are supporting and looking forward to succeed with this focused advocacy efforts to ensure Leave No One Behind measurement will be in place by 2030. So persons with disabilities will be counted, will be visible, and we expect all your support to achieve this all together, united, and especially making this an inclusive world.
Well, let me add my thanks to all four of you for an excellent session, to the organizers of this UN World Data Forum. It's certainly not the UN World Data Forum we all expected to have in 2020. This was meant to be a very different kind of a year. We were going to think about the decade of action ahead, and maybe have looking at some real progress that we'd made on the SDGs. Instead, we're slipping back. The pandemic has changed everything. But hopefully, for those of you who are focused on these issues around data, it has given us a reason to redouble our efforts, and has shown us the importance of data. It's put it more in the spotlight. So I thank these panelists for really helping to underline why the issues around data, statistics are so fundamental to the ultimate issues about making sure no one is left behind when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals. I think you've all done a great job of outlining those opportunities and speaking some truth to these really important issues. So thank you for doing that today. And thanks to the organizers. It's a real pleasure to be a part of it. Thank you.